let's move on to FOIAs, Mark.
Okay. Let me plug my laptop up. I don't want to die in mid-presentation.
Sounds good. Mark has obviously been through the FOIA process a whole lot of times, including the litigation that sometimes follows. So definitely feel free to, ask questions. I mean, we will certainly do a Q&A at the end, but feel free to ask questions as we go.
All right, so I'll talk to you guys about FOIA. So it's like a big portion of my job here. I like kind of oversee and do all things FOIA related. So I'm going to just give you guys an overview of it. So we'll talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of FOIA, how to make a request, what happens after the request, state requests, FOIA as part of your reporting, and tips and resources.
Mark, just in case you missed the very informal poll that I did while your screen was off, I asked how many people here had filed FOIAs before, and most folks raised their hands. So just as a FYI, as you're going through.
All right. So I'll just kind of gloss over this. Just FOIA was created sort of by President Johnson, sort of in the spirit of public records. Basically, an essential part to let people access any and all information, which we know that's really not how it works, but that's kind of how it's used. The Freedom of Information Act provides access to existing records, any records held by the federal executive branch of the agencies. So FOIA allows you to ask for any and all records. Does not include Congress, the courts, and the White House to an extent, but we'll talk about that later. And you can also FOIA state and local agencies covered by state laws. So what can you FOIA? Any agency record. You be as broad as you want. Anything created or obtained by the agency is within the realms of FOIA. One of the key things that I see some of my colleagues and just people I help in general with FOIA struggle with is sort of this, I would like this kind of record, and the agency says we don't have that, or we can't give it to you like that, or we're going to deny your request. The agency has like no obligation to create a record for you. That's one thing to remember. So it's really good to understand like what the agency has and what they don't. Requests can be put in writing or submitted by email in the web portal. And so just give a quick rundown. So like the bad of FOIA, like FOIA is in 9 exemptions. Exemption 1 is classified information. Exemption 2, information related solely to the internal personal rules and practice of an agency. So any sort of practice and policy within any sort of like guidebooks, handbooks on how the agency does stuff is exempt. Exemption 3 applies to tax information and grand jury material. Exemption 4 is trade secrets and privileged and confidential commercial and financial information. And exemption 5 is any sort of like, this is the one that I hate the most. It's kind of, it's written as if it's supposed to be like any attorney-client privilege information is off record. But the way it's used often in federal government is, I don't have a reason to tell you you can't get this, so I'm just going to say exemption 5. And that's usually how it gets used. Exemption 6, I usually don't have a lot of trouble with this one, but this sort of any personal or medical files will be sort of redacted out. 7 is one we'll spend some time talking about. It's this broad law enforcement exemption. 8 and 9 are ones I don't see very often. I've only seen 9 once when I was trying to get some information on like where the border wall was going. And they mailed me 650 pages, all redacted, just black pages, and just sent them to me. Like they didn't have to do that. And they didn't put them on a thumb drive or anything. They printed out all 650 pages, mailed it to me. I thought I got something great. I did not. Very disappointing. And 8 requires to information related to sort of financial institutions, like banking. If you cover banking and treasury, you may run into this one. So FOIA is kind of a broken system. I kind of have highlighted here. I'm not going to do this until they make me. It's kind of a broken system. There's a few buckets within FOIA you want to try and get in. There's a simple track, a complex track, and an expedited track. Simple means that your request is probably going to be processed the fastest. It's very straightforward. The FOIA officer understands what you're looking for and what you're asking for. And so it really goes a long way. And I try and always make sure I find myself in the simple bucket. Complex, as we can see, I mean, just look at the Office of the Deputy Attorney General, which I've highlighted here, 830 days compared to 133 days, depending on what bucket that you're able to get yourself into. And expedited processing is everyone's allowed to make a sort of legal argument as to why they should be able to get certain records in more timely fashion than the agency wants to release them. And so there you're allowed to make that sort of legal argument. And we'll talk about some tips to go into that. So who makes FOIA requests? Actually, to a lot of people's surprise, members of the media make up a very small percentage of the number of FOIA requests that go in. Almost 40% of the FOIA requests that like federal agencies are getting and dealing with on the state, federal, and local level come from businesses trying to get the upper hand on one another, trying to collect information. So we represent about 7.5% of all FOIAs that are filed. So things I'm looking for before I even put in a request. FOIA applies to documents, not information. So meaning when I say that is I can't pose a question or really sort of a vague statement regarding what I'm asking an agency to get for, because I'll wait 6 months to get a response that's denied, because that's not allowed within the spirit of the law. So always make sure that I try and do some reporting in advance to figure out the name of the document that I'm actually going after. And with dealing like FOIA, it usually gets treated like an afterthought, but like FOIA is part of the reporting process just as any. The more reporting you do, the more successful you'll be, because the more you'll know, the more you'll be able to sort of navigate the hurdles and even writing and filing it. So it really is a reporting exercise. Always check the websites, agency e-reading rooms. I call the agencies, see if I can get data without filing a request. I do my homework. I know what I'm looking for. I know how it's kept, where it's kept, why it's kept, and for how long a lot of times. So I try and keep it simple and specific. So some of the do's is I'm very simple and straightforward when it comes to filing FOIA requests. Let you know what I'm looking for, what it's called, when it was possibly written, the exact name and title of it if possible. I try and be very precise and specific. I'm always like polite and respectful until I have to be a little upset. But for the most part, there are a lot of people who are just sort of buried and overworked, so they're struggling trying to get your information. And so I try and make that approach of just trying to help them understand exactly what I'm looking for. Some of the don'ts is like, don't be complicated. Try and not be confusing at all. Don't be vague and imprecise and inconsiderate and antagonistic, because that is one way to upset a FOIA officer and make them just sort of slow walk your information to you. So I'd be specific, I'd be clear, I'm human in describing the request. The way I think of it is like sort of a roadmap or a step-by-step guide. Like if I'm putting together a piece of furniture, I'm going to go to the step-by-step guide. It's going to tell me from piece to piece what I need to get from point A to point B. And that's how I look at my FOIA request. If I'm trying to explain to a person, I want this document, I tell them where it is, who within the agency may have it, when it was created, what it's called, and how, in some cases, how long it is, what page they can find information on. And I'm just walking them step by step through the FOIA request. Now, a lot of the information, again, I get through sort of the reporting process. You can't ask questions or make broad sweeping requests. One thing you want to do is use keywords, use custodians. That's just employees or the names of the folks you're trying to get records for. If you're trying to see emails or text messages or things like that, include date ranges. I avoid ambiguity, so I take out words like related to a lot. So this is kind of an example of just sort of refining back a FOIA request. So the top is the original request that went in, and sort of it's, you know, all reports submitted by the Justice Department, by the monitor under the agreement between the US and Volkswagen. That would probably get us the information we're looking for, probably take a little bit of time. There might be some delay, some other things. So we want to make sure that we get all the most accurate information as quickly as possible. And so that is rewritten to be a copy of all factual evidence. We rewrote it to try and be more precise, to try and be more clear on what we're looking for. We said a copy of all factual evidence, which was the statement that was used, presented by Dow Jones to the Justice Department as the term used on page 259 of the Volkswagen 2017 annual report. It's a complete difference in the way the first two are filed, because we walked them completely to that information and told them how we want it, where we wanted, how it was filed, where they could find it in the exact page, and when it was done. Some key components I always include in my request: the format of requested documents. There's no such thing as Microsoft PDF. So I always explicitly tell federal agencies, do not send me things in PDF. I don't want it. I don't have time to use it or try and un-PDF it. And so I tell them straight up, don't send me a spreadsheet in PDF form. Don't send me some documents in PDF form, because you can't search through them. You can't do an analysis on it. It is just, yeah, it's a huge waste of time, and it'll create a lot of work for you on the back end. So the response times, state and federal agencies usually kind of have a range of time to when they have to respond to you. So it's about 20 days on the federal side, and it varies depending on the state. Fee waivers, if you're filing any sort of federal request, just remember, if you're a member of the media, you pay no money. If you ever run into that issue, or you run into a federal agency who's trying to charge you money, that is, they're not understanding the fee category you need to go into, but you should never pay for federal documents. And expedited processing is where you sort of, at the end of your request, make your argument for why you should have the records turned over to you in a timely fashion. So you do start my request out by citing the law. So this is the first part of my request. This is the request under Freedom of Information Act from Mark Walker, the New York Times. So that's usually how I start out any request I'm putting in. So I try and be clear and concise. So this is sort of a FOIA lawsuit that I won a few months ago, based off a predatory and pedophile doctor who molested children on several Native American reservations across the country for 2 decades. I sued the Indian Health Service to get a sort of secret report they had that basically hid who all knew about it and sort of provided cover for him. So this took some reporting. After I found out this report existed, found out the name of the company, the name of the doctor, the bidding, all types of information. And I put it right in a very clear and concise way that explained to them that this report was done. This report was done by this company, it was authorized by you guys, and this is explicitly what it outlines. So there's no confusion about what I'm talking about. They get this, the agency hears this, they know, like, okay, Mark knows about the report now, great. The format of the records. So this is a typo at the bottom, this sort of electronic PDF, but I usually I take that out because when I got this, they sent it to me in a searchable form. So when I got this, they sent it to me like 8 p.m. on like a Thursday or something like that. And if I would have got this in just regular PDF, there's no way I could have searched through it and find the information or write the highlights enough to get a story up that day. I would have had to read through all 150 pages and could have looked through things. So by not having it and being explicit about the format, I was able to get in sort of a like regular text document and search through it, do a keyword search, and actually had a story up within 45 minutes that night because it made it searchable for me to go through. Response time. So I usually put this in sort of my request as well. They have 20 business days. So I'm asking for expedited processing. It's 10 days to respond back to me. It's not to get you records. It's basically to acknowledge receipt that they have received your request. You're going to need this because I keep track of this because if 20 days passes without the agency responding, you can jump right to court to argue over the documents. You can skip sort of the waiting phase. You can skip sort of the back and forth and negotiating. If 20 days pass without a federal government responding to your request, you can immediately jump to court and ask a judge for relief, which the judges really don't like when agencies like fail to comply with FOIA. So it's usually in their best interest to respond in a timely fashion. So it's good for you to sort of keep track of this. So fee waivers. It's sort of, this is usually my generic fee waiver that I write just to let every single agency know that, you know, I'm a reporter. This is not being used for commercial use. FOIA, the provision that allows for any sort of federal request that I put in, all the fees are waived. So I shouldn't pay any money at all to get any of the documents that I've requested. And so this is just sort of breaking down some of the different things you'll see, because some websites sort of have where you could click through and select things. So the format of the records, when you see this sort of like radio button on a website, like the FBI has this, you always want to look for this in any form or format requested by the person in a readily reproducible form. So whether it's video, images, data, having this in here and noting it was going to go a long way. Fee category, representative news media. So duplicating fees for the first 100 pages. Another fee category you could be in, just make sure you say you're representative of the media, but always make sure you put in there that you would like these fees to be waived, whether it's on the federal government or on the state level. Not all states have fee waivers, but I at least asked for it. Worst thing they can say is no. So expedited processing, an agency has to make a determination on a request within 10 days. If the agency grants you expedited processing, they have to produce the records as reasonably practical as possible. So you basically jump the line ahead of everyone else. If all of us in the room put in a FOIA request for the same information the same day, if only one of us makes an expedited processing argument and gets it, that person is going to get the records first, no matter what. We can do it at the same day, the same minute, at the same second. The person who makes the expedited processing argument and gets it is going to be given priority. And so there's two bases for expedited processing. It's like the failure to obtain records will pose an imminent threat to loss of life or physical safety to a person, and to disseminate information because you're a news organization. I try and make both of these arguments. There's no guarantee that you'll get the information. I've written some I feel like were the greatest expedited processing arguments ever, and were denied. Even gotten calls from FOIA officers that that was a great argument, but we just can't give it to you. Sorry. And it's no guarantee you don't have a right to it, but like I still go through the whole process of like making the argument. So this is sort of what an expedited processing argument looks like. And so I start out sort of a basic generic, there's no argument that like I'm a reporter, I work for the New York Times, and I engage in disseminating information. And so, but this is the key portion. Like, this is my argument for why this information should be released to me. And I basically outlined, just sort of like in summary, the facts of the story that I knew, and made an argument that, like, yeah, if the agency itself is engaged in covering up for abuse of doctors, we should probably know about that. I mean, they've been doing it for decades. It's also another reason why we should know about that and have this information turned over to us in a timely fashion. And so wrote that, and actually ended up getting the expedited processing on this by basically outlining why we thought this behavior was predatory, and it was necessary to inform people of his behavior. I always ask for an estimated date of completion. With federal FOIA, you're entitled to that, and that also helps me with planning. When I first got here in 2019, I put in a request to the FDA, and it was like, hey, we'll have that to you in 2024. And so then I knew if I really wanted that, I'm gonna have to work for it, maybe sue or call them and talk to them. I mean, it's getting closer to 2024 now. So eventually I'll probably get it. And it's kind of one of those things that you should probably know for planning purposes. And I start in the beginning of the reporting process, because that lets me know, okay, I got 2-3 months worth of reporting before these records come back, or I need to have things ready by here for this to come back, or I need to clear my plate by this date because this is going to come. So it helps them go a long way for planning purposes, and the federal government's required to tell you this stuff. So you tie it to a concrete event or one that's going to happen in the future. Like when we requested all the Boeing records, I tied our expedited processing argument to the plane crashes, the loss of life, the number of people had lost their lives, and said that a lot of the records that we needed to sort of inspect and better understand why these planes were crashing. Yeah, there was a risk of imminent life because we already had 2 plane crashes that killed people in the same fashion, involving the same plane, the same make and model that we're all talking about. And so trying to tie it to concrete events, past, future, present, is really sort of like the secret to getting the expedited processing you want. In state FOIA, I do state FOIAs and records requests a lot. Every state has open records laws. They vary. When dealing with them, I spend a lot of time reading through like state websites, to sort of understand what I can and can't get. The National Freedom of Information Coalition has some good templates and good summaries of like what states will release and won't release. So I spend some time reading that and trying to understand that before I just jump right in. So it kind of looks like this, like examining like Alabama's like open meetings laws and public records laws, because they have this very obscure thing that says Alabama and 4 other states have a discretion to where if you're not a resident of that state, they can just deny your records request and throw it out and say you can't, we won't give you the information unless you live here. Sometimes they can even say your company isn't based here, so we're not going to give you information from here. And so there's some states that have that, and that's kind of one thing to like take in consideration and know ahead of time when you're sort of like filing off these requests. So I usually start up all of the requests with like my name, my address, the date I'm filing, try and find the name or department it's going to, someone's title, that address, and just sort of like break it down sort of paragraph by paragraph, with the subheads for each section, on what my request would look like. For anybody in New York City, you guys have FOIA, which is a problem in itself, that we can talk about if anybody has questions, but FOIA is the Freedom of Information law in New York, and they kind of play by their own rules, but there's good workarounds for that too. And so from just doing that story, this story we end up writing is sort of IHS sort of willfully ignored the sexual abuse of this doctor who abused patients for so long. So you end up getting really great enterprise investigative stories by like kind of understanding FOIA and understanding how to use it to actually get what you're looking for. A colleague of mine, myself and Eric Lipton, FOIA'd a bunch of states surrounding any sort of effort to stop the election from being certified, and did an investigation based off thousands of FOIA documents we got back, which this guy, he's a lawyer. Basically, he was the guy who sort of secretly launched the bid to try and block the election results, and like got like the Solicitor General from Missouri to say, sure, that sounds great. And then they just snowballed this effort forward to try and like block the election results. Again, a story we would have never done without understanding like public records laws and FOIA. And then this story is one of our Pulitzer packages, to where at the beginning of the pandemic, we sort of did like the first real deep dive into how the virus was allowed to get into the country. And so, one of the things that I was approached with is like, Mark, you got to FOIA everything. You got to get all these documents. And so I was like, digging it through, and I'm like, everybody's going to go through the front door and probably try and FOIA the CDC and FDA and stuff. And I'm going to do that too. But every time the president talks, he says, it's not my responsibility. It's like on the states. It's on the states. It's on the states. And this is when sort of like strategy kind of gets in, and just sort of like thinking through how you want to use FOIA. And I'm like, well, he says it's on the states. That's who I'm going to FOIA. Like, I'm going to FOIA all 50 states, all their health departments, all their governors, and I'm going to FOIA their communications with the CDC, with the White House, with members of Congress. And I'm going to collect all those documents and sort of get a better picture and idea of what this actually looked like. And so end up getting over 25,000 pages of records from all 50 states. And we're able to get definitive like breakdown of like, here's an agency that exists for one reason. And the only reason it exists was in the event that we had a pandemic, they would be ready to respond, kind of had their moment to finally step out and completely failed. And we showed you how in dramatic, documented fashion. And one of the benefits of doing it this way is FOIA and documents are bulletproof. So when you're bulleting your reporting, like every word, every line, every sentence of reporting, there was a document that corresponded with all of that. So there was nothing the CDC, nothing the White House, nothing anybody could say about the agency's failures, because every single thing was bolstered with a corresponding document. And it's near impossible to argue against that if those are bulletproof agency documents. So it went a long way in sort of trying to tell this piece. And this is another one we did sort of investigation and got some data into Hurricane Maria and so the destruction in the Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. We had the president during the last administration said he was the president who done the most for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and we FOIA'd a bunch of documents and built a database. It took 6-7 FOIAs, did a database that showed compared to the mainland, the amount of aid that was going to these places was significantly smaller and slower. So that's hampering the recovery effort overall. And we're able to do that investigation from there. There's just some resources that I always go to and find helpful. Muck Rock has a public records guide, and the Reporters Committee of Freedom of the Press has information on how to do FOIA. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Madison, go ahead.
Hi, Mark. Just a quick question. Do state agencies also do expedited processing, or is that only for federal agencies?
Some states do. Like I know Nevada has sort of in Nevada, you can make a expedited processing argument to get your documents turned over quicker. So it's basically a state by state basis on whether or not that's allowed.
Michael Seal with Patch Media, and I'm in Alabama, and it's funny that you brought that up. But this is not a very media friendly state, but I've done 2 FOIA requests in my career, and one of the issues that I ran into is that because Patch is actually, the company I work for is actually based in New York. I'm not allowed to have access. Like basically I can't request anything. And so I didn't know if there was a way to get around that or not.
I would use my home address. So if I had like I've had to go through freelancers to file in that state. And so instead of like when you put your name and your address and stuff, instead of putting like the New York address, the information there, I just put your home address, or if you don't mind it going there, or a PO box.
Okay.
That you can receive it from, because that's an actual physical Alabama address, and so they can't deny you that way. And so that's kind of the workaround that I found.
I have a couple of questions for you. One is, what do you do when an agency is notorious for lagging on public requests, public records requests? You know, I know that I'm speaking specifically, I mean, you know, I've dealt with different police departments in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the Oakland Police Department is notorious for lagging, you know, even just responding to a request. The other thing is, have you run into agencies using the pandemic as sort of an excuse to lag? And then my third question would be, you know, can you talk about instances in which a request might be a little too narrow, and then you end up missing things that you might want for your reporting?
So the first one I'll answer the pandemic one.
Yeah.
I think that excuse worked for the first handful of months, but it's no longer a thing. I think even the courts have come out and say you no longer can hold up FOIA and use the pandemic as an excuse. Like, we're going into year 3. Like, if you haven't figured out how to do FOIA and records now, like, that's just your problems. There's no longer like a legal excuse anymore. It has been taken away from them. In terms of the agencies being slow, everybody has a boss. And sometimes I hate doing this, but it is like, if I make a mistake, then no one's just going to email me. They're going to email me. They're going to find my boss, find that person's boss, maybe some other reporters in the office who they know. So they make sure I pay attention to the fact that they think I made a mistake. So I do the same thing back. It's like, oh, this FOIA officer's not going to respond to me. Well, I'm just going to email them, their boss, somebody else, and just say, hey, how's this looking? You know, I've been waiting for a few months for this. And so just kind of light a fire under them a little bit. It's going to upset them. And after it upsets them and they actually do their job, I usually hop on the phone with them and say, you don't have to make me do that. Like, I really like want to work with you and kind of get things done, but like, do it 1 or 2 times and then hop on the phone and talk to them and say, hey, like, we can make this an easier process for all of us. And like, I would do that. And in terms of making the request too narrow, I mean, a lot of requests could be really narrow in terms of, I can ask for something like a specific document, and I may put in a time frame that's too narrow. Like, I may ask for 2 years worth of something, but then I really need 5. So that is just sort of like, I try and let the reporting, that's why I try and do as much reporting as I can ahead of time before I put it in. So I'll know exactly what I need before I like put myself in the box. I mean, you can make adjustments. Like, you can call and basically say, hey, I'd like to amend this. Sometimes folks are friendly, sometimes they're not. But you can call, you can make amendments. As long as you don't have those records in hand, you can amend your request. Don't let them tell you to put in a new one. You're allowed to amend.
Thank you.
Allie and then Nick.
Hey, I'm Allie Morris with the Dallas Morning News. Thanks so much for doing this. It's really helpful. You mentioned kind of targeted requests for specific stories. Are there any FOIAs that you, just kind of regularly file just to keep on top of something, either for a database or just records that you have found to be particularly fruitful that you may just request, here and there to see if something pops out?
Yeah, there's kind of different types it's also depending on your beat, on what you're working on. Like, I used to get calls for service reports all the time when I was reporting in South Dakota. Now I still get the FOIA logs. like I asked for everybody's FOIA logs so I can see what sort of like these businesses and outside entities, what they're trying to get from the federal government is usually pretty interesting. One tip, you can't FOIA Congress, but you can see what Congress asked a federal agency about. You can ask for congressional correspondence log. So every time a member of Congress reaches out to an agency, they have to say why, and you can grab that. I asked for things like visitors logs, so I can see who's coming to visit when. I like to look at calendars. That tells you a pretty detailed illustration of who's meeting with who and when over what. So things like that, I try and make a regular habit of asking for because it goes a long way in sort of reporting of if someone says, I'm not being lobbied by, the oil industry, but you see like in 6 months with the calendars at a lot of meetings with some oil folks, that tells a little bit of a different story than not having those records at all. So those types of things I try and keep handy.
Nick Wooten with the Ledger Inquirer in Columbus, Georgia. I guess my question sort of got covered a little bit, but still wanted to touch on it. How do you balance being too, I guess, specific versus being sort of too vague sort of in your request for records? Like, for example, I filed one last year with the governor's office to get emails about a COVID-19 testing company and a lobbyist group. And I got like 200 pages of emails that popped up just because the lobbyist group was on these newsletters. And it was basically just stuff that I did not need. So how do you balance being too specific versus being open and trying to get as much as you can with your request?
For something like that, and something I put in all my FOIA requests that I did maybe cover was, there's a big problem with charging a bunch of money, especially for documents on the state level. And like, if you get like just kind of requests, you see there's a lot of like kind of junk and stuff. And so one thing that I do tell the FOIA officers, I'm like, if you have newsletters or anything like that, just go ahead and take those out. Like, I'm only interested in seeing, and I phrase this way, sent email correspondence and complete email chains. So anytime a person participates in a conversation, I want that, and then the whole thread. All of those, like, hey, here's your like weekly target rewards. Like, I don't want to see that because it's not going to help me at all, but it's going to run the price up for the records. And so I'm okay a lot of times, like maybe someone has told me like, oh, I think it's happened in this window. I'm okay adding a couple additional months buffer on each side if I say that and sort of strip that information out in the process, because that's going to shorten the request anyway. Like, I've had requests drop from $10,000 to $50 just by stripping out that sort of like those mass emails and newsletters, just because like 80% of it was that. And I got right down to sort of like the meat and potatoes of what I wanted and was able to sort of write that story and felt comfortable casting a wider net than trying to be really narrow a lot of times to keep the price down.
So just for clarity, FOIA would be like New York State, and then FOIL would be like New York City agencies. Is there any overlap ever?
So FOIA would be the federal government, but FOIL is sort of just like New York State's weird thing, which it sounds really close, but it's kind of their public record law. And it's very weird and sort of unique to them. Like, they have a bunch of different rules that, like, just like most other states that they apply and don't apply. They kind of have some of the things. You can do an expedited processing request in New York. You can ask for a fee waiver. They give it to you for media purposes. And so that's something to keep in mind. It's very close to FOIA, but there's a few different things.
Hey, Mark, you mentioned that there are times when you've had to request information from all 50 states. Do you find that, you have to go in and find PIO information for like each specific department where you're within each state, or assuming that they're, agencies operating under their state's executive branches? Do governor's offices sort of run point on that if you don't actually have established connections with these offices already?
Yeah, so I will shoot it off to a member of the governor's office because a lot of times they're not very straightforward on who it goes to. And so I will usually pick a press person and basically say like, you're the media flag, so I'm going to email it to you and either let that person respond to me and say, hey, it's not me, it's this person, and then log that in, or have them say, okay, I'll take it and like push this to the right person. And so, but I make them tell me it's not them or make them tell me who it is by just picking them out sometimes. But yeah, the governor's office is the point person I go to.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for joining us today. My question is on appeals. Have you ever had to file an appeal? And what has been the result? Because I feel like sometimes when you sort of get a no, then people just walk away from it. But have you been successful on appeal before?
Yeah, I try and appeal almost always, especially B7. B7 is a law enforcement exemption that basically says like any law enforcement records are like, we can't release them because it's like under investigation, especially if you're like FOIAing like the FBI or CIA or somebody like that. You hear a lot of that from like federal law enforcement, and it's complete bullshit. That is just them saying that. So 2015, under the FOIA Improvement Act, President Obama actually made an amendment to where it says now it is on the agency to basically argue and say why the release of those records would cause harm to the investigation. And any records that are not harmful, they have to pull out and release in full to someone. And so that's something I end up appealing quite frequently, is sort of like law enforcement exemption records, because they're not allowed to withhold like full investigative records. Like if they've exhausted some leads or closed a section of a case, like for like, you know, I'll use Roger Stone example. Like if Roger Stone's being investigated and they've closed his portion of the investigation out, they have to break that off and give it to me because that's done. It may be a part of this larger investigation, but releasing his information now that's closed off, done, and sent off to the courts or whoever it may be, that's not going to harm the investigation by releasing that. And so I always appeal and make that argument, or sometimes I even say it up front, like, you're not allowed to withhold this in full. And so please release this information. So that's a lot of times ones that I would challenge and push back on.
Hey, Mark, David Martin Davies, Texas Public Radio in San Antonio. I'm working on a story about 1974 death of a voting rights activist. The local PD deemed it was a suicide, but looks like it was not a suicide. It was an assassination by the Ku Klux Klan or another group. I'm having trouble getting records going back, 48 years. I'm getting a lot of that doesn't exist anymore. We can't find it. How reasonable is it? And there's also was like an FBI investigation, which those records may be at the National Archive, and they're giving me the runaround as well.
Okay, so first I would go to the state archives. And I would check with the state archives and see what they have and see if they can pull them. A lot of the times they do keep copies of these records held. So I would start with them. With the National Archives, I'm blanking on the name, but you can, and I wouldn't necessarily make it I'd make it a FOIA request if they made me, but they have a specific name for a person who they say basically their job is to go fetch records. And I would say, I'm not asking you to make a determination as to whether or not I can get these. I just want you to go get them. Like, I want you to go fetch and pull these records because I know they exist. I put one into the FBI too, because they could possibly go pick them up themselves. Or if they have access to them, they could send them. I find the FBI is actually pretty good with historical records because it's something they can easily pull. And with that, I would write something in my FOIA I would say the name of the records, but I would tell the FBI to do a cross-platform search on all of its sort of like document hubs. So like the FBI always says like, oh man, we have the internal record system. In my experience, nothing is in there, because every time I ask for something that's in there, it's like, yep, we checked the internal record system and nothing's there. The FBI has like hundreds of different databases and document mainframes where they house stuff. And so this is it. I'm pretty sure those historical records are somewhere, and they're really timely in pulling those. So I would ask them to.
I'm Donna. I work in Detroit at the Detroit Free Press, and just on the FBI, you'd mentioned that they could release anything that doesn't harm the investigation. So if someone's under investigation, like a politician's under investigation for public corruption, I guess what's the best way? Because their response is going to say like it's going to hurt the investigation if you try to FOIA anything, really. I guess what's the best way to get through to them or to bypass that, just to get some kind of lead on what they're investigating?
So in the initial request, I would take that FOIA Improvement Act of 2015, and I would put that in my request up front, just to let them know that you're from, because like the part of it that the reason why this is up seeing such issues, because they try and play stupid like it's not a thing. And so they ignore it unless you tell them that you're aware of it. And I would cite that up front to sort of like let them know, kind of set the tone to where like, I know that you're supposed to break out records that won't harm the investigation. And that's specifically what I want you to do. I want you to review all those records, find things that aren't going to harm the active investigation. And I want those. And I want you to give that to me.
I have sort of a time management question. I mean, sort of when I've tried FOIA-ing, it's such a long process, and the more records you get, sort of the more time it takes. And I'm kind of curious how you break things down in terms of doing the pre-reporting that you talked about and crafting the request, and then going through the documents and more reporting and all those things.
I've gotten better at it, I guess, over the years. I am not the most organized person, as your fellow Joe Snevy, if you could recall what my desk looked like. My system used to be just stacks and stacks of papers and folders that I knew where to pull stuff from, but if someone else had to, it was just like, I got nothing for you. But I sort of like write stuff out. Making lists kind of like helps me a lot of like, do this, do that. I try and put things on the calendar so I can keep better track of when things are coming, how long it's going to take me. I try and take some time when I have some downtime to like write out some templates as well, especially when I'm going to be filing to the same handful of agencies, to save me the writing time. Like just draft some templates ahead of time, sort of research some generic fee waiver language, research some good expedited processing arguments, and just sort of like save some time on the front end by like building these processes out early, to where like when I need to go file something, I just pull a template or pull a draft and then work from that. And that's has saved me a lot of time, honestly.
I can attest, I don't know if it has to do with working at the Argus Leader or what, but you kind of come up disorganized, at least the way it looks. You seem to have experience now dealing with records requests across the United States. Are there state, like, what's your analysis on what states are better than others? And I guess, how do you navigate that? Like, is Alabama the worst?
South Dakota's the worst. That's probably how I got good at doing public records requests, is because South Dakota's like, it's the worst by far. I think there are a couple of US territories who have better like records laws than South Dakota. That's how bad South Dakota is. I guess one of the things that I just kind of learned of doing is like, it's forced me to develop some sort of strategy, because let's say a governor of Nome is like mad at somebody over like meat packing, or there's complaints against meat packing. Yeah, I can't go get her emails, but like, if she's emailing she can email any other person in the country and it's fair game. Like if she's arguing with like the governor or the mayor of Washington State, like the governor of Washington State or like the mayor of Seattle, I just FOIA that person's communications with the governor, and that's complete fair game. And so while she won't give it up, that person will. And that's kind of like the way I end up getting good at FOIA, is sort of like thinking of like backdooring things. It's kind of the same method I use for that CDC project of, while South Dakota's hard learning these other states, learn backdoor ways of getting information. It's completely, everyone else is completely open. Like the president is exempt from FOIA, but if the president emails, so let's just say like the governor of Texas and just goes on a rant and just like grips him in a full email chain, while I can't ask the White House for that, I can FOIA the governor of Texas to get that, and they have to turn it over because Texas's laws say like email correspondence are good. And the White House can't do anything about it because it's a state request, not a FOIA request to the federal government. And so there's a lot of weird workarounds and ways to sort of like navigate that. And so and it kind of goes back to the question I was asked about like even saving time. It's like developing a FOIA strategy is like really a big part of what I do. It's sort of like I sit and spend some time like, how can I get these? Who has them? Who's been talking to whom about what? Is there a federal agency? Is there a local regional agency? If there's a city official or a state official in another state that may have access to this, and really like just sort of build a strategy off that.
We had an example when the CDC or the White House was issuing those weekly COVID reports to each state. The White House denied a request from the Argus leader to get that and said, you have to get that from your governor. And they denied the request and said, you have to get that from the White House. We ended up getting it from ABC, who posted them, ended up getting them and posting them all online, all 50 states anyway. But before that happened, we were sort of stuck in the lurch. Is that when legal action is necessary, or how do you navigate out of that?
See, it's kind of that. And also like I may have called like some other states. If I knew that this was like a weekly update, I'm like, okay, if all 50 states are giving them, let me call Minnesota or like Nebraska and talk to their like health department or somebody from like their governor's office and say, hey, are you guys getting those? Kind of what do they look like? Do you get them for like all 50 states? Like is South Dakota in there? And if they're like, yeah, we get them for all 50 states, everybody gets them. It's just sort of going to be like, you know what? I'm just going to pick whoever has the most friendly public records laws, and I'm just going to FOIA them. And like, I'm going to ask for them reports. Maybe I even call them and say, hey, I'm going to put in a records request. I only want South Dakota's. Seems weird that I'm FOIAing you to get South Dakota's records, but I can't get them any other way. So I'm going to put this in. And a lot of people are like, as long as it's not me, we're good. And then they just turn them right over and fill it in. And so that's what I would have done. I think that's kind of what ABC ended up doing anyway. They got it. They asked for it from someone else and ended up getting it released.
Has anyone filed a FOIA and is currently waiting on a response, just out of curiosity? Jacob?
So 2020, yeah, still from like 2020, which I just, is partly due to like, negligence of not following up and appealing and stuff, I guess. But I asked for like, and I can't remember it. Probably wasn't well written either, but it was like, trying to get records related to the cost of moving the Bureau of Land Management from DC to Colorado. Just have still waiting on that. And it might have been something about, Secretary Bernhardt's, how much time he was spending in Colorado versus DC, and like, but yeah, as you can tell, I sort of lost focus on that.
That's okay. I mean, the administration has changed over, so I would try and maybe follow up with them to see if you can get it, because I've started to get those, hey, are you still interested emails from like the Department of Interior? And they seem to be more, they want to sort of clear that backlog. So I would circle back with them. And I'm sure if you say this is a priority for me, I still want it, like they'll get on top of it, because they've been doing that with me recently.
Anybody filing one for an upcoming project or thinking about it? Madison?
Oh yeah, we've been doing a ton of FOIAing around the country for trying to piece together police responses and to like trans homicides from local governments. And it's been an adventure. I mean, because a lot of the times these are smaller departments. So it's like dealing very personally with these flats who have lots of questions and who are straight up asking, like, before I give you this data, I need to know why you need this, which is not something they should be doing, etc. So yeah, definitely we have a bunch in a spreadsheet that we're tracking right now.
Okay. Yeah, no, they definitely shouldn't be doing that. They're like, you don't have to tell them anything.
Yeah, especially given, and they should know that given that they were a former police or investigative reporter.
Yeah, that's probably the only reason they're asking too, to try and see if they can figure it out.
Yeah, exactly.
Hi, I'm Nicole Blanchard. I'm with the Idaho Statesman in Boise, and kind of jumping off of Madison's point there, we have a lot of really small counties here where there's, maybe one employee or they don't deal with FOIA very often. And I work with outdoors and environment stuff. So when it's like rural based or recreation based, some of these counties feel like they have no idea how to navigate their end of the FOIA kind of agreement. So I guess, do you have any advice for working with some of those smaller counties or agencies that maybe aren't as familiar with what they should be upholding on their end?
I mean, I think it's just like any kind of working relationship and just kind of helping them understand it. And just sort of hopping on the phone, trying to learn more about it, help walking them through and teaching them like what they need to do. Because a lot of times, like, again, they don't. Like, I've had to deal with a lot of small town counties and cities during like COVID. And it's honestly hopping on the phone. It's like, I'm just not sure what you want. And I'm like, I gotcha. And that's usually a good opportunity for me, like kind of build a relationship too. So I hop on the phone and we just chat, kind of walk them through and explain it and just kind of be really patient and work with them. And it pays off. It goes a long way in building those relationships. And like, well, pre-pandemic, I would like go out for coffee with them or something like that. And they are really good relationships and really that will help go a long way. Like when I was reporting in South Dakota, I had a lady who I worked with, she did it. She actually had like surgery and then got out of surgery. And when she woke up from recovery, emailed me some records I was waiting on. Her name was Jill. And she was like, sorry about these records being delayed. And I was like, nah, it's all good. She's like, I just got out of surgery. And I'm like, why are you emailing me this? You should be recovering. But we had such a good rapport that she felt bad, despite the fact she had surgery, that she wanted to make sure that like I got my story done and got the records I was looking for. So building those relationships and go a long way.
How have you been doing that now? I mean, just in the COVID years and not being able to sit face to face as much.
I do some like Zoom chats and Zoom coffees and stuff like that, and those help. Those do help a lot.
Yeah. Nisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa from Michigan Radio. One of my questions for you was with like the American Rescue Plan and like our funds being kind of distributed to states and governments, I was wondering like, should we be like asking first before FOIA? Like, how do you think we should like, I guess, plan for that? Thanks.
I would make some calls and just sort of like kind of get and figure out like, I like to just sort of like kind of gauge the landscape and see how friendly people are going to be up front. And then if it seems like it's not going to go anywhere, then start getting those requests in. Because by the time the clock starts running, it's going to be time to, those requests are going to hit at the point they need to start pulling all those records and stuff. So that's what I would start doing. I would gauge and even talk to people and say, hey, what should I be looking for? What should I be looking out for? There's something specific I should go after or ask about or talk to. Like, is some of the intention to make this public? Because that also helps, like understanding like what portions of it were intended and have been discussed privately for it to be public and what aren't. Like there became a big issue with the PPP loans. It's like, yes, the Small Business Administration said like, no, these aren't public records, but like written on the application, it said like, oh, these are public records that will be releasable under FOIA. And that like understanding that and knowing that made a big difference there. So I would hop on the phone.
In our open records laws, which you've noted are very weak, the agency director typically has discretion on whether or not to share these, this data, this information. If they've, so I guess if it's shared publicly once, is it always public going from there? If they use the discretion to share it with one organization, I mean, does that set a standard then?
I didn't think even the Department of Justice has a rule in that. It has a the Department of Justice kind of has a standard for it, where it's like it doesn't really help for like competitive reasons, but like I will cite it for like one of those reasons of like it's called like release to one, release to all. And so where they say like their thing, they like, price, if you release a set of records to one person, like that sets precedent that you release it to all. Which is why they keep track of the FOIA logs, because if I want to see something that was released in 2012, that'd be helpful for what I'm working on, because if it says it was released in full, all I have to do is ask for it and they have to give it to me. And so that's kind of like the DOJ standard of like they've been trying to set is like release to one, release to all. And that's what kind of they hope that public records and FOIA is being practiced. So yeah.
Go ahead, Allie.
Sorry, I just said one more. You mentioned
Oh,
using.
I don't want to cut anyone off.
No, no worries. You mentioned that some states are better than others and kind of using them as a backdoor if you're foiled in your own state. Which states, especially I guess through that COVID reporting, have you found are the most accessible when it comes to open records, or who hand over the most information?
So Florida does, they have a price tag attached to it, which is why I would pull that newsletter stuff out of there, because I found that like 80% of what I get from Florida is like press releases, newsletters, mass distributed emails. If you pull that out, that'll make that very cost prohibitive. I got their request dropped down from $83,000 to like 60 by just like pulling all the junk out. And so Florida's great. Surprisingly, Idaho is fantastic. If you want some information or some dirt on another state, I mean, Idaho is even given to me same day. Where I like put in a records request to like the Idaho governor's office or someone in Idaho, they're like, oh yeah, we got that, here you go. It'd be like same day service. I'm like, this is great. So I FOIA Idaho a lot. And so they're great. Kentucky's great. They're gonna charge you for the flash drive and they only take checks, which I've learned because I still owe the Department of Treasury $2 in Kentucky. But outside of that, they're really great. Louisiana's great. Washington State's pretty incredible. A lot of the like Northeast, take out New York, Pennsylvania's good, Delaware's good, New Hampshire, I mean, pretty similar, not as good as Idaho, but pretty similar. Like if we've got it, we're going to give it to you. South Carolina and North Carolina, oddly, are do pretty well. Nebraska and Wisconsin. I had a lot of trouble with Iowa and Wyoming. So those are like some states that like are pretty friendly. Colorado does is okay, kind of like middle of the pack. But yeah, those are some states where like, especially Idaho, they will turn over everything. And like, it's great.
We've been fighting with folks for a while, so we sue folks quite a bit from the press club, so I think we're setting the stage there pretty well.
Yeah, I asked for something from Idaho once, and I thought it was going to be very simple, and they sent me like 5,000 pages. They're like, "Yo, here you go," and I'm like, "Thanks." I don't have to read all this, but like, wow, I didn't expect to get this far so quickly. So yeah, it works out there.
Well, I don't want to cut anyone else off, so please interrupt me if you do have more questions. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank Mark. This was so informative and I think really helpful for everyone. And yeah, let's give Mark a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you guys.